Shall we dance?
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Another week flying by here. Rick Wagner joining you here this weekend on Kansas City KGLN and a lot of other places all across western Colorado, eastern Utah, and a lot of other places on the internet and various places, of course, the ships at sea that we love their input, those brave men in their wooden boats out there. I'm not sure what they're doing, but it's very important. They're feeding people, is mainly what people at sea are doing these days. Many of the people at sea, by the way, are sitting on their rear ends, waiting to unload their cargoes for days, weeks at a time, because they can't get into port, they can't get transportation, they can't get things running, they can't get people to work to unload the ships, they can't get the truckers in there. In California, from what I understand from speaking to a number of truckers, is a real pain in the rear end to run trucks in and out of. And it's very difficult for people who are owner-operators to be able to pick up at some of these places, I'm told. The port and so forth like that there seems to be I know we're all shocked. There might be a bias towards unions and things like that out there. But nevertheless, it's just difficult. And the price of fuel is ridiculously high out there. So if a trucker goes in and he's got a contract to deliver something, and he has to spend twice as much on fuel as he was expecting, or maybe only 50% as much. Gee, that makes it easier. That's going to make him reluctant to want to take loads out of that state. So, so the ships out there are sitting, and they don't make any money when they're sitting in the ocean. And another thing, this is something that Dave Barry, the former columnist, now retired, and I think he writes once in a while for the Miami Herald, very funny guy. Dave Barry said that he discovered from living near the ocean that water is bad for boats, particularly seawater. So, sitting out there isn't doing anybody any good, certainly not us. Listen, on this first segment, what I wanted to talk about is something that is a little not in the immediate news this week. I mean, we have so much of it. It's endlessly bad, and we can only talk about Biden wrecking the economy and toddling out there with his whatever's been done to him to make him be able to speak for 10 or 15 minutes and rail at people and threaten them to get off his lawn or whatever he's doing out there. What I would like to talk about a little more is this Ukrainian thing, because obviously it stays in the news. Although if you notice, it's dropped off a lot. It's not every 10 minutes with somebody standing in front of a bombed-out building. Ukrainian reporting here from another location looks exactly like the last location we were in. Not to minimize the injuries and stuff that's been done over there, but after a while, we're just not really getting any actual information out of it. And some of these network news people standing in front of TV screens with maps on them, wildly waving their arms around at places we have no idea where they're at, and they don't either, really, which you can tell, is not helping anybody in terms of getting information. But I think the more immediate concern is we're shipping $40 billion worth of something to Ukraine. We're not exactly sure what. Weapons, support. I was hoping the Kardashians would be shipped over there. They're worth a few $1 million. That'd be something. They could be fired out of cannons at people. I think that would be useful. That'd be the first useful thing that they've done. But at any rate, that's certainly not going to happen. But we also don't have any oversight. Remember that Rand Paul tried to get an inspector general assigned over to oversight where the money was going, but no. Trying to know where your money's being spent when you give $40 billion to a country that has a really bad history of doing the right thing with other people's money, that makes you probably a Putin supporter, if not just an outright stooge of Putin. That's kind of the narrative that comes from the Democrats in there. They would know. They are stooges, and I don't mean the Three Stooges type, which were actually amusing. But nevertheless, let's think about this for a minute. Other things are going on in Ukraine if you step back and look at something besides just aimless reporting of things that you can't tell where they're at or what's going on. If you look at a little bit of the reports about what's happening in terms of advances and what casualty figures that you can get out of there that you can trust, which is practically none, you can see where the battle lines are. At least we can't per se, but I mean, obviously people from satellite photos and a little bit on the ground can tell what's going on. Here's a question I would ask in relation to the Ukraine is, what if they gave a war and nobody won? And, as a corollary of that, but nobody also went home. Now, you remember in the 70s, we had that, what if they gave a war and nobody came? That's sort of the peacenik kind of approach to that. This is a little different question. You can have protracted warfare for a very long period of time in which no one is successful. And even at the end of it, it's difficult to tell if anybody was successful. And they can degenerate, things like this, into long-term stalemates, slogging back and forth, each side gaining a few feet, the other side losing a few feet. There was a fairly long period of that in World War I. There were a tremendous amount of casualties. Trench warfare was not conducive to large gains in territory. And it appears that's sort of similar to what's happening now in Ukraine. The Russians are becoming more and more dug in the eastern part of the country and around the Donbass area. And what they want, clearly, is they want to capture the ports along the Black Sea as much as they can, and they want to hold at least that rim, 20% or so of Ukraine around there that has heavily Russian-speaking people in it and has been, in one form or another, in many of those places, having some sort of revolution since 2015, where people were trying to break off and do something, maybe join Russia, maybe doing, no one knows. But it's been under a cloud down there of sort of revolutionary fighting, probably supported by the Russians as well, to be fair. But they're getting dug in down there. And, we talked a couple of weeks ago about what some of the historians, particularly Victor Davis Hanson, the military historian, has said that the Carthaginian solution, which is where if you can't win, if you can't advance, or in Carthage, they just got tired of fighting them and they weren't going to fight them again, so they just eliminated the city and the people and everything there. But what he meant by that is that you can create a wilderness. You can create an area, a buffer zone, where you can defend that, dig in on one side of it. The enemy, people you're against in the stalemate, whatever you want to call them, can't advance across that because it's no longer something that you can advance without being seen, without having any defensible positions to advance from. And so it is essentially a no-go zone. And it can be very large, and it can be very destructive. Russians appear to be doing that in some areas, just blowing the heck out of large tracts to make them not a place that you could stage an attack from. And what do you do when people get dug in like that? Now, if you look at the Russian history, and we've mentioned this before, Russia, even as a Soviet Union, has never been very good at expeditionary force warfare. That is, going far away and fighting, or even out of Russia and fighting. The Brits, they were real good at it. India, Africa, West Indies, they kind of figured that out. Russians have never been particularly good at it, probably because of the way they fight, which has traditionally been to just burn up a lot of troops, and then when you've sort of worn down and forced your way through, then come in with a heavy, elite, but relatively small group of warriors, whatever you want to call them. I'm going way back in history. And then there's still war fighters now, and try and win or overrun the place. So, as we discussed here before, so their attitude is different about it than the way we see the way to victory. Clearly, they got bogged down. They did not get what they wanted. They weren't able to make a lightning strike around Kyiv. They got bogged down with their armor. We've talked about that before. So now it looks like they decided to just hold. Russia has had this before. Their history has got several wars in it that just generated a stalemate. The one that really sticks in my mind is and you might look this up, the Swedish-Russian War of 1788 to 1790, which was just a brutal stalemate. So let's watch this for a little while, I think. I think we may be seeing something that's just not going to go away for a long time. Neither side is going to give up. The Ukrainians can't afford to surrender. The Russians aren't going to go home after they've spent so much lives and treasure on what they've got so far. And it will be something that I think will be very instructive for us to look at, to see that sometimes wars aren't over in a couple of weeks like we've come to think in this country. We'll be right back.